Hello everybody, welcome to episode 4 of the AdvancedVape build guide. So in the past few episodes we've stuck with a velocity style deck and we've just kind of stepped forward in difficulty using more difficult wire types, but we've used the same build deck. We used the velocity dripper velocity dripper in the first one, and then the griffin in the second and third. And those are the easiest to build on, and it's a great place to start. But most drippers these days that are out, the new ones coming out use velocity, but the vast majority of ones that are out there on the market right now use a different kind of build deck. So we're going to take another step forward in difficulty today, and we're going to build on the plume veil. So this is a 4-post deck. So it's quite a bit harder to build on than a velocity style deck, and you'll see why once we get into it. But it's a good idea to learn how to build on a 4-post deck, and it still has good performance. And I like the plume veil. I don't like it as much as the velocity or the griffin, but there's just a lot of 4-posts out there, so you want to be able to build on it. So that's what we're going to do today. And we're going to be going with our stainless steel Clapton wire, 26 core, 30 wrap. And we're gonna kind of go for a cloud chucking sort of build, just a little rowdy kind of thing. So I'm gonna go with 6 wraps on a 3mm, and we'll go on and get into it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'm not pulling down as hard as I did on the title or the hive, just enough pressure to get it wrapped. Now you'll see I made one leg really short, and I'll explain that later. You can either do it this way, or I'll talk about it later on. I'm going to go on and wrap the other one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so when you're building on a 4-post deck, as you can see, they're all kind of lined up in the same plane, and that makes it a little bit harder to build on for a couple reasons. Most importantly, just a coil wrap naturally will have one low and one high, and 4-post kind of ignores that. You just sort of have to force it in there, and you'll see what I mean when I go to install it. So you've got these 2 holes in the middle, that's the positive, and then you've got the outer wires that are the negative. So you want to try and put one on the outside and one on the inside, but you don't want to do it right next to it because the coil is too big for that. So you want to do one here, and then jump over one hole and one here, and do the exact same on the other side here, and jump over to this one. So I'm just going to go on and put it in there. And I gotta kind of give a little bit more effort to get it in there than I'm pulling on the other side now than I do with the velocity kind of deck. I'm pulling as I'm pushing at the same time. Okay. Now I'm just kind of holding them in place there with my left hand while I screw it down. Got the wrong bit on my screwdriver. Okay, sorry about that. I had to find the right bit. Oh, that works better. Okay, so I don't want to tighten it down too much because it'll just kind of cut that wire in half, but I want to make sure that it's snug. And another thing to keep in mind is that Phillips head screws like these, they can kind of back out. So you want to get the right level of snug and then leave it be. But also be aware that it can back out a little bit. And by back out, I mean unscrew and loosen up the connection. Okay, so I've got these nice and snug now. And now I'm just going to kind of move it over. Didn't mean to fire it there. Now I'm just working this off. I'm going to go in and put this in lock just so I don't accidentally bump it again. This button on this mod is very easy to push when you're working with it. So you want to be sure not to do that. Almost got it off there. Okay, so that's the easy one. The second one is a little bit harder. And if you remember, I made one leg very short. The reason why I did that is that on a 4-post deck, since the holes are all lined up, you kind of, if you're putting the wire in there, it's going to get in the way. This coil is going to get in the way. So what I have to do is either wrap them normally and then pre-trim it, or you could just do how I did it and go on and wrap it that way so you don't have to trim it. But if you do pre-trim it, you want to kind of line it up, line the coil up as you would be installing it, take a look at where it needs to be, and so I would trim it right about halfway through where that screw is, because you don't want it to go out the other side. But I already took care of that, so we don't need to do any pre-trimming. Now I'm just going to kind of, with my thumb here, I'm going to press downwards to get it lined up. And now I'm going to hold it in place because I don't want it to back out. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing with this one, just kind of squish it downwards and get it into the middle, because it wants to be offset. This coil wants to be on this side, and this one wants to be on this side, just because of where the holes go in there. So you just kind of have to force it over a little bit. And now I want to make sure that it's not touching the center post. And remove this leg. Okay. So because of the way that this build deck is, and the fact that we had to move it over, it's going to have long legs. But that's okay. So ideally you want to be using an ohm meter. I've built this build a lot before, so I know kind of what to expect. But if you're new to building any kind of build that you haven't done before, it's best to use the ohm meter just starting out instead of using your device as the ohm meter. So we're ready to start firing now. We're going to be using our ceramic tweezers and some normal tweezers also. Forgot I was in temperature protect mode. That might make things a little difficult. Sorry about that. I was wondering why it wasn't firing. There we go. That hissing is juice that I had on my tweezers and on the device. That's, if you're wondering why it's hissing like crazy. Okay, so I want to take this moment just to kind of talk for a second about the way that I'm dry frying. So you have the option of using ceramic tweezers and squeezing and firing, and that's probably the best way to do it. And also in my other videos, you'll have seen me kind of brush against it. And I tend to do that on something like a Clapton or a vertebrae, and especially on space coils because you can't really squeeze space coils. So using these is probably the safest way to do it, and I just want to take a second to explain why I'm scraping it and the way that I am. So it kind of just, it helps get it to fire correctly without reshaping the coil, if that makes sense. I'm not squeezing it to reshape it, I'm just strumming along it. But you need to be really careful when you're doing it. Don't ever fire it while you're strumming it. And you also don't want to brush along it while the coil is extremely hot. That can mess up the coil, and it can have possible safety, health kind of issues as far as damaging the metal while it's really hot. So I'm really not brushing very hard, and you need to be careful not to do it too hard. I'm just kind of strumming along it lightly. And the coil can be warm, but just make sure that it's not glowing hot. So as you can see, it gets it firing correctly if you're just gentle with it. And I use the ceramic tweezers to get it in the right shape, lined up, everything. And then I kind of finished it off with brushing on it. But like I said, gentle, not too hard, and not when it's really hot. So I would never want to brush it when it's red hot like that. Okay, we've got it firing perfectly. Looks good. And sometimes you got to be a little bit more patient with the 4-post deck on whether or not it's going to fire the way that you want it to. Velocity is a lot easier to hold the coils in the right place. These you gotta have to mess with the coil so much that it kind of gets bent out of shape. But we got it firing okay. It's a pretty mean looking build, and now we're gonna wick it. So kind of another problem with the 4-post is that our legs are going to be in the way of the wick. So we need to just kind of be gentle with the way that we wick it so we don't mess up the legs. And you'll notice that I put quite a bit more wick in a dripper than I do in RTA. So an RTA is always a less is more kind of thing, but not so much with a dripper. You don't want to overstuff it, but you'll have to try and stick with a really tiny amount like you do on a griffin or a goblin, something like that. Okay, we're almost done. So I'm cutting most of the cotton off, just because the plume veil doesn't have a whole lot of room for wicking, especially with the legs being in the way. I'm going to put just a tiny bit on there. And now I'm going to carefully insert the cotton. Sorry about that. So I'm carefully putting it under the leg there. Being careful not to actually disturb the coil. On this side you've got more room. You can just kind of stuff it in there. Okay, I'm going to snip this off to kind of separate because they got stuck together there. Now it'll be the opposite on this side, with the leg on this side. If you can't fit it under the leg, you can kind of put it over. Just however you can get it in there, really. Just be sure that it's not laying on top of the coil. Okay, so I don't want to have a whole bunch of cotton in between the outer post and the inner post, and I'll explain why in a second. You want to try and leave this gap open on this particular dripper. Doesn't really apply to any other 4-post, just this one. So I'm leaving a little bit of a channel in there. Okay, now we're ready to finish juicing it up. So as you can see, it just kind of takes more time in general than a 2-post, and it's more difficult. Caramel apple smells good. I'm just pulsing just a little bit to get that juice soaked in there. Okay, so the reason why I kept those little channels in there, the little gaps between the outer post and the inner post, is that this device has little tiny air holes there. I don't know if you can see that. It's right there. It's little side air holes that actually go through the post to give airflow from the bottom. And it's just one of those little features that only this dripper has, but you know, one of those unique things that is supposed to help the flavor. I think it does. It has air coming directly at the coil, and it has air through the posts from the bottom. So it just helps boost the flavor a little bit. So when I put it on, I want to make sure that those holes are lined up. There we go. Now we're ready to give it a shot. Turn it up to about 55. Okay. This dripper whistles a little bit. So normally after I do a dripper, I take a couple hits and then recheck the wick. Make sure that there's nothing on top of the coils. Just check everything and make sure it's okay. It's giving great flavor, good performance, nice kind of cloud chucking sort of build. Tastes good. So that pretty much brings us to the end of episode 4 of our build guide. If you have any questions, leave a comment, send us an email, let us know. And if you have any recommendations for other episodes that you'd like to see in the build series, just send me an email or leave a comment. Thank you.